All right.
Now let's rock and roll.
Let's go.
Do it. We got some people
So
joining on.
registry update, people. I have no idea who's on, but I'm assuming some good people are on.
We've got
We
good people
do.
on.
Yep. Some great people joining. Yeah.
Oh, I see 30. Yeah, there's participants.
There we go.
Man, I would say hi to all of you, but that might take a minute. So just know that I said hello.
And reminder, feel free to jump into the chat with any questions or anything. Luke and I are monitoring that today. Yep.
Throw anything you got in the chat, and my good friend Corey and Luke will help us acknowledge those. What is today? So 9:15. Yeah, that's the latest numbers. So let's start with, I believe, what county is this? It's missing on my sheet at the top. I can't see it. Is this Cobb or Fulton, Luke?
I think this is Fulton. I think Cobb is below it.
No, I mean, this is Cobb. I'm sure.
There's Cobb right there.
Okay, so we're starting with Cobb actives. Last week we saw 255 jump onto the MLS, and prior week was 294. Before that, 544. So there's clearly the evidence of a slowdown in actives making the market. Could be the product of some seasonality. Active under contracts at 66, slightly up from last week's reporting, slightly down from 2 weeks prior, which makes sense since that was end of month reporting. Pendings 52, that's actually pretty low. We've got 2 consecutive weeks. And one of the things about data that I find most helpful is just trends. Like, where's it going? And I don't think 2 weeks constitutes a trend, but it is a blip in terms of the historical numbers we've been seeing. So if you felt a little bit of slowdown, it's in Cobb County, it's evidenced by the data. Expires 33. So mid-month expires, that's actually lower than a month ago and a couple of months ago, but pretty consistent. And then closed at 50, definitely down from our historical of late average. Manny, any thoughts on those?
I think you're right on the nose. These trends we got to keep an eye on them because we are feeling it, right? I was lucky enough to get out this weekend, got to visit a couple open houses that were happening. And as I'm talking to some agents, and by the way, kudos to KW, because one of the best convos and most informed was a KW agent up in Cumming, right? But they're feeling it, right? As you're hosting these open houses, you're having the conversations. So you want to keep an eye on these trends. But we're seeing the back to school, right? All of that. There's some seasonality to this, but we cannot ignore what we're about to talk about in these articles, right? And that is what we're seeing.
Yeah, and the idea is, how do you get your unfair share and use this data to your advantage? Because data is only good for, data nerds. It doesn't help with the psychology of success in your role. And ultimately, what I do like about data is you can't hide from the numbers, and you can't hide from your contacts to connections to appointments. So, tracking your own data is almost more important, because the idea is you get your unfair share. And what this still illustrates is there is opportunity. There's no good or bad market. It's just a market. And the goal is to win in any market. All right. So what's next up? Who do we?
This is
DeKalb.
DeKalb looks pretty similar. Down the last couple of weeks. Interesting that there's, it's a collective or global impact of what's going on. 445 actives versus 473. Prior weeks, we were over 1,000 pretty consistently. So that's a pretty noteworthy number. The next week or two is going to be very revealing and telling. Is like, okay, it's headed into October. Seasonality kind of hit us a little bit earlier than normal. And, is everyone in vacation mode or hold out mode? We'll talk a little bit about interest rates and the potential impact there. To inspire and bring buyers to the market, which might spawn some seller engagement as well. Active under contract at 96, down but up from last week, so that's a positive. Pendings way off relative to last month and the month prior. Withdrawals right in line with last week and the week before, actually. expireds, not a big, substantive number relative to the whole, and then closed at 63. And it feels a lot like what I just spouted off about Cobb County in terms of, the number and the trajectory that we're on short term.
Yep.
All right, maybe take a glance. That was okay. We're moving to articles. This is not one that I covered, Manny. Were you able to read this article?
I think we were looking at kind of those that last batch, Luke, of articles. Yeah, some of because I specifically, and Rick, you can tell me what you have taken, but I think just as we go through these articles, I wanted to start with we are going to talk about where our focus needs to be right now. We are in a market where we have to be so hyper focused because there's a lot of confusion, hesitation, anxiety, right? And these articles kind of show us that. And it's not for the doom and gloom of it, but I think because we need to figure out how to prepare ourselves. So, Rick, if you want to kind of start us with this one, then we'll chat about it.
There's the 4 key factors, honestly, are all interrelated. It's like market uncertainty, psychological stress, overall market uncertainty, and then there's the psychological pressures. What's number 3? Because I want to lump them all together because I think the answer is the same. Overall economic trends and climate uncertainty. So natural, I've got a place in Florida, and this year we haven't had quite the hit so far, but that could change tomorrow. But, I don't know that impacts Georgia other than the distraction and the noise that comes from it when things happen outside of our environment.
Yeah.
I mean, we did have a hurricane, the effects of one roll through last September, interestingly, Helene, I think it was called. And we were blessed that it sort of took a right turn, and unfortunately, our neighboring states took the hit. But those are factors. But I think the psychology of winning, relative to what we do day in and day out, Manny, we need to listen better and speak less. And I think there's a saying that prescription without proper diagnosis is malpractice. And sometimes we make assumptions about what people think and feel because we assume everybody's listening to the narrative. And my first piece of advice is, if psychology is the number one goal to cut through so that people can make conscious decisions that are intellectual, you got to first understand their pain point. To assume that they're caught up in any of those 4 narratives is probably misdiagnosis, or at least the potential of. And so there's 2 things I learned from a book called Fierce Conversations. One is that no one denies their own truth. And so for me, I learned early on to ask better questions and tell less. And instead of selling, I'm consulting. And the second thing is that silence does the heavy lifting, or let the silence do the heavy lifting. And so whenever you feel emotional tension from someone, just take a deep breath and ask a really good question and then stop talking. And let them reveal their need or opportunity for you to then resolve and solve.
I think with this article, it was exactly what you just touched on. The one big takeaway I had is kind of using empathy first, right? Being able to default to empathy because we have to validate our clients' concerns, right? They may not be our concerns. They may not be real concerns. Right. You just pointed that one about the environment and, that being a big, how do they call it? Climate risk and environmental concerns. I hadn't stopped and thought about that. But if I'm putting myself in some of my clients' shoes, they sit and watch their news all day. They have it playing in their office or they have it playing at home. So you are getting bombarded with the tragedies, these risks, environmental risks that are happening in different places. And unfortunately, they're carrying this. So we do have to put ourselves in those shoes and be able to, the communication skills is what you pointed to. And you're right. We have to learn how to have these conversations and ask those questions that are going to lead to that empathy and understanding, right? And then we bring in the business side, right? Then we bring in our expertise and we navigate them through the cost of waiting, right? We localize the narrative, right? So that we point to, okay, now I heard your concerns. Let me show you what this looks like for our market. Being able to mitigate all that, I think, is that secret sauce.
Well, it is, and you make a valid point. If you roll straight to solution mode without leaning into empathy first, you run the risk of being perceived as a salesperson and that you have an agenda. By expressing empathy, it shows genuine concern and care, even if trivial. I mean, we all know this. People make up their own story and that becomes their reality. And there's even a quote that's like, I think it was Mark Twain who said, I've suffered many a trial and tribulation, most of which never happened. And regardless, if you don't stop and take time to listen and ask questions and give them space to process, they're not going to move forward because that emotional energy will probably create a lockup. So excellent.
Yeah. All right.
So this was an interesting heat map relative to where I think it's the active listings that are coming on board. Maybe click on it. And this was in, I believe, Inman News had this article. And again, it's great material for a macro view, although it does get pretty micro. And what I don't think it does is break down property type, but it's all properties. But it just gives you a general idea of where listings are landing and where the activity is greatest and where they're up or down relative to year over year. I think, again, real estate's hyper local, as we all know. And so once you get the general landscape, I think the best story or the best question and narrative to run with is, hey, this is my target neighborhood and area. How does this data really live inside of my neighborhood or vice versa? How does my neighborhood live inside of the macro? And that should be part of your either AI generated or real life. You just have quality thoughts and share those with the people that need to know. Anything to add, Manny?
Yeah, this really made me look at it and go, seller hesitancy is real, and it's getting more and more real. So we always talk about having to be the expert. This is just proof that you have to, right? Like this, there's no other way around it. The second feeling I got from it as I was looking at this info is that I'm very proud of our network, right? We do a quarterly stats review. I know our offices work hard to provide this information, whether it's through team meeting or our office stats, right? And as you have those experts in your office, you need to be having these conversations, right? Because we can't dig our heels and put the blanket over our heads right now. Not in this market.
You're exactly right. And one other thought I had, going back to 2008, 9, and 10, when the market was truly, borderline depressed. I remember consulting agents regularly about how, there's actually a saying in the fishing world that 90% of all the fish are in 10% of the locations or areas. And if you fish the wrong area, you can be the best fisherman on the planet. If they don't exist there and they don't live there, you're not catching a fish. And I think sometimes as markets evolve, some areas are more fertile and more, there's more opportunity. And so, if your pond is dried up and you're not getting your unfair share, then maybe start to do, the concentric circle dance and give some thought to expanding your reach and maybe a different, demographic or socioeconomic, group, or, there's a million ways to tackle the networking game. But, if your network's not feeding you, you need to enhance, improve, or evolve with it. That's all I want you to hear.
Yeah.
And do it.
And it's a great map to play with, for sure.
It is. It just illustrates where opportunity lives relative to this data chain. What's up next, my man? This made me laugh. I mean, computers are smart. There's no way around it. But I remember having a conversation with Gary Keller himself in a mastermind, 25 years ago, when the internet became a much bigger thing and Realtor.com and Zillow were the big threats. And ironically, to some degree, that energy still exists. And we were worried that now that the data, that all of our key, data that made us special, like what sold when and for how much and what sort of, what were included in the transaction, any upgrades or closing costs, like that's incredibly helpful when it comes to negotiating and pricing. But there was a moment of fear, Manny, where, well, if consumers have all the data, what's our real value proposition? That became the discussion. And what we learned over the last 25 years is that more data doesn't necessarily mean clarity. More data often means confusion and uncertainty because now you have to second guess the source of the data, the accuracy of the data. And that's where I think we play a much bigger role, maybe than ever, because of that. And additionally, with all that data, back to the article we just saw about the psychology of buyers and sellers and the fear embedded in the, all of the information they're receiving, it creates stress. And we have to be that borderline therapist of choice, for how to work through it emotionally as well as intellectually.
Not just that, we have to now learn how to navigate conversations where, and this is you, Rick, you can correct me if the feeling's different here, but I think we now have to be able to look at clients who think they know it all and have to say, I'm sorry, you're wrong. The data you read was national. Here's what's happening in blank city, right? Or in blank county. And that's hard. That's maybe something we want to be boisterous about or go, no, you're reading the wrong information. You can't say that to a client. They will run to the next real estate agent right down the road, right? So how we communicate is so important. And this one, how do we take ourselves out of the, all this information's at their fingertips, whatever? Well, it's because we have to then study the tone of voice, right? Who we're talking to, even who our clients are. I hope you're doing research on generational communication, on generational understanding, generational fears. They're different throughout the spectrum, right? Dealing with a first-time home buyer right now is they're under so much stress. They think they can't buy, right? We know this. How are we having these conversations?
Well, you're right. And that I still go back to that empathy first. And even though it's easy to be empathetic to someone in pain, it's hard to be empathetic sometimes for me with somebody who thinks they know it all. So that's an incredibly important point, because there is a percentage of the population that is well studied and already committed to an opinion that may be inaccurate. But if you go in and tell them they're wrong, they're going to defend, deflect, and deny. If you go in and give them, honor them for an opinion and go, hey, that's really cool, and I respect that you're coming from that place. Can I share some additional information that might shed a little light or insight to counterpoint or balance that out that you might want to consider before making a decision or not making a decision? So it's about embracing and teamifying versus, I guess more competitive. Keep it from being competitive, because it's not your opinion against theirs. It's how do you overlay in their need, want, and desire categories so you can fulfill, the opportunity. And there's more wealth built in real estate than any other vehicle I'm aware of. And I regularly am reminded that there's no piece of real estate that I don't wish I still owned, period. End of story. Ups or downs, we don't have a crystal ball. We're reading, tea leaves here, hoping to figure out the future. But at the end of the day, I'd still keep them all. There's not one that I wish I had.
I hope people were listening to that even snippet of scripting that you just did. That was like butter. That just flowed. I mean, and that's how it has to feel, right? You have to feel that. I mean, I felt it in your voice when you're telling me, I really love that you're doing your own research, but let me share. Can I? Right? These are the key phrases. Can I share? Or get that permission so you can bring in the real expertise. I love that. That was great.
Thank you, buddy. That's awesome. Appreciate the validation. We all need it. How do you know when someone needs encouragement? They're breathing. True story. And that's what your clients need right now more than anything. There's a lot of disturbing energy in the air. I think we all realize that these are turbulent times, and man, there's nothing quite like the voice of calm and love and respect. And man, you don't have to call with fancy data these days to connect and open an opportunity for a conversation.
That human part.
Yeah. So interest rates, we didn't really touch on it, but I think they're like 6.25%, look, I'm not going to say that Brett was right or wrong, but this is a great story to talk about. And we'll see if interest rates move buyer demand. It should. There's no reason. That's why they do it, to spawn, investments. And this is, as much as it is consumer debt, there's also business debt that when they lower the rate, the banks borrow at different rates, and it becomes more advantageous for companies to expand. And this is all to fight inflation and to create more jobs. And so I liked it. I feel like for the first time in a while, they're trying to get out in front of it. You could argue that they're not, they're late to the game, but here we are. And it's a narrative that honestly is a fun narrative to share.
I saw an agent on social media that I think said it well in the very frustrated voice that we probably all carry at some point. But, she said, you know what, a little too late, but we're going to take it, right? We're gonna make lemonade out of these lemons, and again, it's how you communicate this information, the opportunities, right? We just have to be that guiding light.
Yep. I think it's if the key question is affordability, and that there's another article that we may show at some point if we don't run out of time about how most, I guess, these surveys are showing that buyers think pricing, home prices have sort of stabilized or at a minimum aren't going to continue. There it is. Good job, Luke. Man, you're Johnny on the spot. You're Luke on the spot. Most Americans think mortgage rates and home prices have peaked. So to me, that's a positive because now they'll start paying more attention. It won't be this distant noise that they're ignoring because of fear around affordability. Maybe this helps drive confidence, that we've got something to work with. It's another story, and it's not the same story we've had for a while.
Yeah, it's not the floodgates that we wish we had, right? It's not the floodgates that even some people back last year were trying to promote or hope for, but it is enough for you to pick up the phone and share some news, and that's where we need to be, right? I think if you're reading these articles, if you're taking, throw them in chat. Ask, how do I start a conversation with a past client or with someone who's on the fence? It will really help you out. We want to emphasize the education and the communication for sure.
Well, and here's the flip side, Manny. When the world locks up and they're worried or concerned and all the psychology they talked about, that's really where opportunity lives. It's kind of the Warren Buffett theory that when people stop buying, that's the time to buy. When people are selling, you get the point.
Yeah.
There's opportunity that lives in, a seller that's been on the market a certain amount of time, hasn't had the success they want. There's vulnerability that, you can capitalize on for the betterment of your client's position. And it's another narrative. Here's a piece of advice. Make sure you're using current real life stories to support your opinion. Who do you have in your client base that a month, 6 months, a year ago that made the decision, a difficult potential decision to move forward, that now are ecstatic with that decision? People buy stories, not data. So with each of these data points, make sure you illustrate how that's to their advantage and make it as personal as possible and tangible as possible.
When we talk about feeling like we're doing things right, this is another one of those moments because all of our offices have incredible lending partners. And that relationship right now is so important because we need to do more setup for them to come in and do their job. But they then also need to know that we got their backs and reassure them throughout the process of what we're dealing with, right? So I think that's a great thing to think about is how is your relationship with your lender, because it's important right now.
Well, and what's the precursor to the next wave? And to be honest, what I've also read was that mortgage applications are significantly up over the last 30 days. So that tells me, if that's the case, these are people that are poised to pull the trigger and are future competitors. And my question to my client would be, how do we get out in front of it and capitalize? But, once it's obvious and, the early adopters win, not the late adopters.
Yeah.
And by the way, there was a graph that Luke intelligently showed a minute ago that showed the people that think it's a bad time to buy versus good time. There it is. This is awesome. Like if you're working with a buyer right now, go, hey, these people are probably missing the boat. But the second thing you have to share is, and here's why. If you can't show them why, fewer competitors and opportunity favors them, they're not in. And there's a saying that everyone wants to buy, no one wants to be sold. So the secret sauce is to promote all of these thoughts and ideas in the form of a good question. So based on this, it looks like fewer buyers are in the market competing for your perfect house. How does that feel?
Yeah, that's it.
And I kind of I went digital, I went data and empathy. How does that feel? And let them self-prescribe, man. No one denies their own truth. All right, moving on.
Tanise, I hope I said that correctly, asked about a good book or resource to learn how to ask better questions. I'm a big Phil M. Jones, follower. I love hearing him talk and just go down the rabbit hole of questions and conversations. This little game right here is something I keep on my desk because I just pick it up and I go, let's talk, right? Let's role play. Those role play moments are so important. And going back to the lender, right? Have some role playing with your lender, with your, your coach, your mentors, right?
Yeah.
Rick, anything you'd add there?
I would just add that anytime you know with definitive confidence what the answer to the objection that's forthcoming, you can take time to really listen and spend less energy trying to conjure up your best answer. So that skill-based, realtor discussion we've been having for ever, maybe at least the last year, really plays out when you consider there's probably 7 or 8, 10 real objections that are recurring. And you just got to be back to, that's butter. That just means you already knew from your head and heart where you wanted to go with the conversation. And then you can, instead of, defending, deflecting, or responding, we talked about that on a Mojo. It's better to respond than to react. And responding implies that you had premeditated thought and you didn't just take the first thought that popped into your head. And this is the perfect season to master that. And I love the cards. There's another book that I read years ago that really shaped how I look at things. It was called the QBQ. QBQ. I don't know the author's name. If somebody pulled that up and put it in the chat, that would be cool. But it stands for the question behind the question. And, again, we're spending a lot of time today talking about skills and scripts because I think it's every bit or more important sometimes than the data, because if you're not connecting, you're disengaging and you're not winning. But the QBQ talks about another person's truth lives in the second and third question, not the first. Like if I asked you, Manny, how's your day going? You're probably going to say, play it out. How's your day going, Manny?
I'm doing great. Keeping busy. I'm looking at information on the market and yeah.
Well, you even gave more than most people would. The first answer is usually great. And then if you're going to go QBQ style, you'd say, well, explain or share what great looks like. And then you might go, well, what's 1 to 10 look like? And if you were a 9, what's a 10? If you were a 7, what's an 8? And somewhere along the way, you're going to get their sincere, heartfelt answer. And that's something you can really work with because, again, we're solution finders and, consultants at heart when we're playing it right.
And Rick, we've got limited time here, but I do want to say the convo we just had relates to this article that Luke has pulled up right now, right? This is exactly what we're talking about. You've got to, implement these conversations. And there are so many missed opportunities that we have. And I'm realizing it now because the deals aren't dropping. I'm not getting a call with a listing as much as I was, 4 years ago. You need to figure out how to, be at your local coffee shop or bar while watching a game. And how do you naturally bring up real estate? How do you naturally ask these questions, right?
How do you spark that question that creates intrigue?
Yep.
Again, people want to buy. No one wants to be sold. So that means coming from a position of knowledge and confidence. Look them square in the eye. The truisms for connecting are truisms. And this is kind of there is a long litany or list of questions that you might want to ponder and think about. But ultimately, it tries to hit on closing. Like, what does it look like to close? And to me, it's asking really good questions, revealing a need, and then helping them self-discover a solution. And then you're in a position now of authority and support, and advocate really is the best word. You're an advocate for their words and say, well, based on that self-actualization or that realization, how can I serve you best? Which, if you've done your job, we should either buy or sell based on the conversation. And so I do think that sometimes we're soft because we're scared that somehow we might be perceived as a salesperson. Because I know the people in my world, most of us don't sit around going, man, I'm the ultimate salesperson. We prefer to think of us as consultants, friends, and supporters and allies. And those are rightful things to do. But at some point, it is acceptable and appropriate to go, do you want to buy it? Or do you want to sell it? So based on what you now know, what's the next best step? And if you've asked the right questions, it's going to be the right answer.
Exactly. Our goal right now needs to be to smoothly take a client from interest to action, right? And maintain that authenticity and trust that you're talking about, because that will build the stronger relationship. And, then you can ask for the referral, right?
Yeah.
I know that we posted, I believe Luke threw up the script for today. We hope that you are taking these, putting them on camera, sharing them, right? I know that we're doing a great job at the Inspire Network to reshare those on social media. So here's your topics, and if you made the call, you've got access to it first. So congrats on showing up.
Yeah, our goal is to be the easy button, to feed you inspiration, motivation, and then some intellectualization around this so that you can speak intelligently. But man, the tools make it super easy, and that's what we're here for, is to make your life easier and better.
And remember, these are pretty timely, y'all. I had an agent ask me, hey, you talked about this, 2 weeks ago. Do you still have it? I don't, because it's gone. That moment passed, right? These are based off the articles that we're reviewing today. So today is the day. Go film this video, throw it out there, because it is current, and that is what we need to be.
Right on.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts, Manny? That was actually a pretty solid last thought. But if you had one left, we've got a half a second here.
Oh man, I got rid of all my thoughts now. No, no. Listen, my last thought is that daily I wake up thinking of the pressures that we are under. As a team leader, I see it. We have these conversations, y'all. Please take care of yourself, your mental, your physical. Rick, how many times do we talk about this? But you know what? We need to keep hearing it, because we all slip, and it's okay. We just get back on that horse. So I think just take care of yourselves, right?
Yeah. And connect and communicate with more people. There's a direct correlation between the number of people that you have honest, open, authentic conversations with and the opportunities you'll be granted or given to go help someone make the best decision of their lives around real estate. So a question unasked is a question unanswered. Make sure you're asking a lot of quality questions and you're connecting with quality people. There are people that need you. And if you don't reach out, someone else might, and it may not be the best person for them.
100%.
You guys have an amazing day.
Yeah. See y'all. Thank you.
Love you guys. Thanks, Manny.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Corey. Thanks, Luke. You guys are incredible.
Amazing.
Do our
Have
best.
a good one.
Hey, and it works.